Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Jefferson. I'm the Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Lesley. It is my distinct honor tonight to welcome the fourth gathering of this season's Thought Leaders Series at Lesley University. Tonight, we will learn about the application of mindfulness studies to the front lines of some of the most critical areas of society. Gina Rollo White is the founder and CEO of Mindful Junkie, a nonprofit organization focused on first responders, stress, and trauma. She has over 15 years of experience as a mind-body teacher, educator, and author. White has a master's degree in mindfulness studies from Lesley University, and her graduate thesis was Mindfulness and Law Enforcement, an effective approach to implementing mindfulness for first responders. White has spent the last 7 years developing trauma-aware mindfulness programs tailored for law enforcement, fire services, medical professionals, military, and other trauma-sensitive communities. White leverages her education as well as her decade of experience as a Pilates instructor to use the power of mind-body connection to help heal the people who regularly confront the most dangerous and frightening aspects of the human experience. First responders contend with unimaginable stress at the cost of doing business in the service of others. They run into burning buildings, treat victims of automobile accidents, and routinely put their lives at risk to maintain public safety. And her practice is hardly born of mere theory. As the daughter of two first responders, White experienced firsthand how chronic stress impacts first responders and their families. As a child, White saw how the sacrifices her parents made for their communities not only took a toll on their physical and mental health, but also created strain at home and in the family. First responders are fortunate to rely upon Gina Rollo White, her expertise and compassion, and we are fortunate to have her in our company tonight. So please join me in welcoming with your heartfelt applause, Gina Rollo White.
All right, the introductions are always weird, so I'm always like reticent to hear them, but thank you. It wasn't so bad. Hello. So welcome. I'm so happy to have you all here. I'm just gonna head right in. So about a year ago, I was driving down the street. And I have 3 daughters. We were just at dinner earlier this evening, so I kind of told everybody that I have 3 daughters. And having 3 daughters is challenging enough in itself. But I was driving down the street after dropping off one of my daughters at soccer. And as I left her there, and I'm driving back, and we live in this, it's a small town, but it's kind of a big town in a small town. And I'm driving down this particular street that's very narrow. And I drive a F-150. So a big truck, and it's not a flex. It's relevant to the story I'll get to. So kind of a flex. So I'm driving in my truck, and I have my little teeny dog with me, which is not a flex at all, my little terrier, and she's sitting in the car with me. And as I'm driving down the street, we come to this area where there's a stop sign, and I'm about 5 cars back from this stop sign. And I'm sitting there in my truck. Siri. Oh, Siri. So I'm in my truck, and I stop, and I just kind of glance over at the right, and I see something, but I don't really process what I see. I just kind of look over. So then I'm sitting there again, and I thought, something looks strange. So I looked again, and when I looked over to my right, like, your spidey sense kind of clicks in and you're like, ooh, something weird's going on. Well, I was like, something weird's going on, but I don't really know what it is. So I rolled down the window and I look more clearly. And at first there were these 2 big guys sitting there on a stoop, and in between them was this woman. And initially I thought maybe there was some kind of weird like sexual assault thing happening, because it was so strange. And I looked again and I said, hey, is everything all right? And the second I said that, this woman kind of went like this. And her head fell forward. And I thought, uh-oh, there's a problem. And I got on the phone and I called 911. And I said, hi, I would like to report an overdose. Because I started making this mental calculation of where I was. I knew where I was in the city. I knew the people that were there. And I was like, oh, right, it's an overdose. Well, of course, the first thing 911 said to me is, how do you know it's an overdose? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just guessing it's an overdose. So she said, okay, well, is the person breathing? And I was like, I don't know. And she said, well, can you ask? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Excuse me, is she breathing? And they were like, I don't think so, no. And I said to the 911 operator, I don't think she's breathing. And the 911 operator says to me, okay, well, I'm gonna need you to get out of the car and make an assessment. And I said, you know, I drive this really big truck. It's a very narrow road. There are so many cars behind me. I've got my dog in the car. Like, I'm not sure I should really get out of the car. And the 911 operator is like, you need to get out of the car right now and go provide some CPR to this woman. And I was like, yes, ma'am, right? But I froze. That was a complete freeze response, right? Making excuses about my car, making excuses about my dog. Oh, there's traffic. I can't get out of the car. I literally just froze. But the bigger question, though, was why? Why was I the person engaging in this situation, right? There were other people around. I mean, the neighborhood was full. There were other cars everywhere. People are driving by, people are walking by. Why am I engaged? And if you would have asked me that question 7 years ago, I would have said, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. I reacted to a situation. But if you had asked me that 6 years ago, I don't know if any of you recognize this campus, but that's Lesley University. And it was here on this campus that my advisor said to me, while you're writing your thesis, you need to go out and you need to ask some questions. You need to go out if you want to work with first responders, because as was mentioned, my thesis was mindfulness and law enforcement. Well, it was mindfulness with, law enforcement, which I extended to first responders later. You need to go out in the field and you need to do some interviews. You need to do some research and you need to understand what first responders are actually saying. And so that's what I did. I went out and I asked first responders. And I went to this one guy and I said, hey, you know, I want to talk to you about mindfulness and law enforcement. And he said to me, so like, what's your interest with first responders? Why first responders? And I said, I don't know, they're just like really cool people, right? They save lives, right? They're like doing the good in the world. They're amazing people. And he was like, oh, okay. And I went home that night and I said to my husband, can you believe this guy asked me why first responders? And he said, well, you made the connection, right? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, of course you want to work with first responders. You are the child of 2 first responders. And it seems so obvious now, right? But at the time, it was like an epiphany. It was like, wow, yeah, right? I'm the child of 2 first responders. My mother was an ER nurse. She worked a trauma unit in California. I'm from California. And by the way, I work with a lot of law enforcement, as I mentioned. And when I go into a room, we were talking about this earlier. Everybody always has their arms like around their chest and they're looking at me like they hate me. And I say, oh, by the way, I'm from California. And everyone goes, ah, because they're like, ooh, they could explain this. Like, now we get it. And that's like the first icebreaker. I'm like, yes, this is California. So anyway, I'm from California. And so the ER unit was in California, in Los Angeles, where there is a lot of crime and there is a lot of deaths and there is a lot of sexual assaults and domestic violence. And so my mother every day would go and work in this trauma unit. And every day she would come home after having witnessed atrocities, car accidents, sexual assaults, gang violence, a ton of gang violence in our area, right? And so every single day she was dealing with trauma. And my father, he worked air ops for LA County Fire Department. And that was like, he was the guy who hung out the side of the helicopter and like rescued the people the hang gliders that went into the side of the mountain. He would rescue them, right? Horrible stories of motorcycle accidents, right? Of gunshot wounds, of children and death and swimming accidents, and every day. And no wonder I thought, first responders are badass. They are, right? unfortunately, there was this other side. And this other side is what happened at the end of the day behind the closed doors. And this other side is also what I saw. And this was a lot of sadness and a lot of dysregulation and inability to process, to even understand what they're going through, and then have to be with their children and be with your family and pretend like, oh, everything's great, but it wasn't. My dad was really violent. Holes in the walls, couches thrown over, tables turned over. Mom would cry and just disappear, become dissociated. I mean, and this is what we saw every single day. They were constantly in a fight, flight, and freeze, right? Constantly in an emergency. Everything was an emergency to them. And they lived that way, right? It's no wonder I have my eyes on things. I still, to this day, I'm constantly scanning environments for an emergency. I know where the emergency exit is. I know how to get out of here. I'm not going to sit back there. I mean, I scan the whole thing. It's just how we were reared, right? But being in this emergency state all the time is trying, and it's consuming, and it puts us in inability to relate at the level that we want to relate on, especially with our kids. And that's when I started really diving deep here at Lesley University into my thesis and really wanting to understand why do we react the way we react, right? And do we actually have the ability to change our actions just by thinking about it? Can we think thoughts to create new thoughts? And what does that look like? How does that even work? And how does mindfulness play a component in all of this? I was teaching mindfulness before I came to Lesley University to general population. But when I started fine tuning into first responders and asking these questions and started wanting to know what already exists, what's in the world of first responders right now for stress management? What does that look like? And when I went out into the field and started researching it and doing questions, one of the questions I asked was, what are you seeing? What are you saying is stressful right now? And a lot of things that we would think are stressful were, funny enough, at the top of the list was coworkers. I feel bad like that. I'm like, I can't put that at the top of the list, but coworkers, right? It's hard enough being married sometimes when you're like put next to someone that you didn't choose to be with all day long. That's a lot, right? And in a firehouse, you're in 24 hours at a time. So you can't sleep. No one understands the stress I have. I don't feel like I can focus and do what I need to do. And these are just, by the way, these are high level. I got these across the board: fire services, police, correctional. And, funny enough, this picture, when I did a training in California and I put this picture up, and I always thought that this guy he was just so defeated and stressed. And they're like, oh man, that's Sam. He was sleeping. I was there that day. He fell asleep. I was like, oh my God. Okay. He's not stressed. He's tired. Okay. Number one, I can't sleep. Fine. And so when I started bringing this into the world of first responder, as you can imagine, there's a lot of distrust and there's a lot of misconceptions of what mindfulness is. And I don't know if you can really focus on this picture, but imagine Burning Man, hippies, smoking weed. That's a huge misconception. You go into law enforcement, you say mindfulness, they're like, yeah, hippie, here she comes. Here comes the hippie, right? Wear the yoga pants and the Lululemon pants and yoga, and right. And those are just misconceptions that are there. And so they're real. And it was a huge burden for me initially working with first responders, because you'd have to go in and break down the misconception. You're like, this is mindfulness for first responders, but it's not like what you think. Just getting in the door with a program called Mindfulness for First Responders was a no-go. It was a non-starter. So I changed it. And by the way, I'm not brilliant. Other people are brilliant. I didn't come up with this. I came up with this idea of brain training. I'm like, I've got to change the narrative. We've got to change. You know how it is when your nervous system is really ignited? You don't want to hear anything. When you're stressed out, you don't want to hear anything. So the second I say mindfulness, they're like, screw you. Right. And so you change it to tactical brain training. All of a sudden, doors opened. And it's kind of like smoke and mirrors, right? But it's true. Mindfulness trains your brain to think. 100%. You're training yourself to identify thoughts, to do something about your thoughts, to take an action with your thoughts, to respond versus react. And this is all through neuroplasticity that you guys, a lot of you are learning. This is all happening. You're training. And just by calming people's nervous system down with a new title has enabled me to go in to so many different locations. It's like, yeah, tactical. And it's true. So tactical brain training, I created this curriculum, by the way, based on my thesis. I took a lot of this from my thesis, taking it out, workshopping it. I did a study, and the actual training itself, it's very basic. It's the psychoeducation of stress and trauma, right? It's just like high level stress and trauma. It's science. It's a lot of case studies. I've been doing this for over 7 years now. I've collected a lot of case studies. And why is that relevant? Because it's relatable. When you can explain a situation to someone and they can go, oh yeah, I've been there. And before what you can do, here's how you can handle that situation before you get into an emergent situation. Here's what you can do when you're in the middle of an emergent situation. Here's what you can do when the crisis calms down. Oh, wow. Okay. It makes sense. Right. But one of the biggest things that I include in my training is a self-assessment. And this is really important because when you are working with a group of people who are traumatized, who are in chronic stress, and chronic stress is defined as ongoing. It's not just this one moment of stress, right? And I think we all know that from COVID. Like everybody's had chronic stress. It's just this stress that doesn't stop, right? It's really important to create something that's personal. Mindfulness is personal. Doing a meditation is personal. And it's not a one-stop shop. It's not every mindfulness intervention is going to work for every single person. You have to find your own niche. You have to figure out what works for you. And by creating an assessment during each training, it helps to create a program specific for that individual, not for everybody, for that one individual. And I include a ton of takeaways, which I'll show you some of the takeaways. But I present this all in this concept of this window of tolerance, right? Which is to say that when things are copacetic, when life is great, we live in this window. Maybe things aren't perfect, but you can deal with it, right? You can manage situations. Might not be perfect, but you can get done what needs to get done. When you are popped out of the window, when you're living in an emergency state all the time, you tend to be at the top or bottom of this. My father was hypervigilant all the time. It was go, go, go. It was big, big, big. It was, when he said jump, man, we jumped. When he said duck, we were like under that table in 2 seconds flat. Everything was an emergency. My mom, hypo, distracted. She would cry. She would disconnect. The door would shut. You could just hear her. And all the time, not just randomly. This is their constant state. And with mindfulness, you're teaching to widen this window. You're teaching to look at this place where you can find ease and be with what exists. Whatever that is, be with it. It's not going to be perfect, but at least you could be with it. And so when I talk about mindfulness with first responders, it's really helpful to put it in this framework and look at it, because it's not about always remaining in the window. You're going to hit an edge. We hit edges all the time. Everybody hits edges. I hit an edge when I was in the car looking at this poor person who OD'd. It was too much for me. I hit an edge and I popped right into hypoarousal. I was like, I can't get out of the car. I've got my dog. You want me to give CPR to someone? I can't do that right now. My truck's too big. That's stupid, right? You guys can agree that sounds really stupid. It was a response. It was literally a freeze response. And one of the things is we can train towards is, I was looking at that thing on top that was covering the words, but it's fine. You can read it. We train to look at signals. We have constantly signals that are occurring in our body that are giving us information. And when you can train for these signals and you start identifying these signals, you have more access to how you want to be in the world. You have more access how you can respond versus react. And these warning signs can be an image, a sensation, a mood, but you have to train to notice them because they're there all the time and we just don't notice. And when you learn, when we do this training, we talk about these different levels that you can dive into. And then you go, okay, well, I'm noticing these signals are happening, popping me out of my window of tolerance. I'm all of a sudden feeling hypervigilant. Now what can I do? Okay, well, I have X number of mindfulness interventions that I'm learning because each training comes with a myriad of mindfulness interventions. Throughout the entire course, I'm interlaying. So I do some lecture and then we do a mindfulness intervention. I do some lecture, we do a mindfulness intervention, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, assess, work, assess, learn. So you start going, oh, okay, I can do a sensing meditation. I can do an imaging meditation. And it's really helpful to start practicing these to know which ones you want to use in which scenario, right? And the idea is to go, okay, an alarm is going off. I'm out of my window of tolerance. I know because my mood has changed. Now I'm going to choose something. I'm going to go, okay, my mood has changed. What do I do? Okay, I pick a tool. What are my tools that I could choose from? These are the mindfulness interventions I've learned. And then that pops you back into the window of tolerance. Things might not be perfect, but you're back in a place where you can manage things. And one of the ways that I teach this is to talk about this concept of stop, drop, and roll. Now, little side note here, I was working with an international group and I taught stop, drop, and roll. And at the end of it, does everybody here know what stop, drop, and roll is? Right? You're on fire, you stop, you roll on the ground. Well, they don't teach that in Europe. I don't know why. Stop, drop, and roll was a concept. At the end of it, they're like, what is stop, drop, and roll? I'm like, oh, I didn't even think to define it. But in case maybe you haven't, you're on fire, you stop, you drop to the ground, you roll, and it puts out the fire. Well, you can think about this when you're thinking about being out of your window of tolerance. When you're out of your window of tolerance, you're on fire. What do? First thing you know, you need to stop. And that's that pause. And that pause can do so many things, but that pause is a moment to go, what are my signals telling me right now? What are these alerts telling me? Did my mood change? Am I clenching my fists? What's happening right now, right? And then you drop, and that's when you assess. Okay, I've done these mindfulness interventions. Which one works right now? And then you do it. You just apply it and you roll with it. And putting it in this framework, it's an easy way to remember it, right? It's not special. It's not magic. I didn't make up stop out, but was like, I don't know, maybe that'll work. It's just a way of remembering it. And you, throughout each assessment, you're looking at each one and you're going, okay, I'm going to evaluate and I'm going to assess to help me define what system works best for me. So, okay, I'm going to name the meditation. I'm going to assess it at both before and after each intervention. And there are a ton of different ways. One of the misconceptions of mindfulness is that you're sitting there and you're sitting in a chair or on the ground and you're not moving and you have no thoughts and you're just breathing. Now, that's cool. That's badass. That's cool. Like, do that. Yeah. There's other ways too. There's a ton of other ways to be mindful and to practice mindfulness. There are square breathing, there's body scans, there's listening to signals, there's surround sound, just counting your breaths. I mean, this isn't even, the list goes on and on. And here's what I give them. And this helps to create a system for yourself at the end of the day of what works, right? You go, okay, what's my mood now? Okay, how did that intervention feel? And did I like it? Like, what's my mood now? What's my mood after the intervention? And did I like it? All of this is very important for people who are dysregulated. And you could argue that a lot of people are dysregulated, not just first responders, right? But if you work with first responders, one of the most important things is safety. Safety, right? You need to feel safe. And one of the ways of creating safety is to say, there's no perfect way to do this. This is not a one-stop shop. This is a free-for-all. You're finding what works for you in the moment at the time that you need it. So you don't need to sit still. You don't even need to sit if you don't want to sit. You can do this however you want to do it. So you set it up by doing that and saying, if you have an itch, just itch. You know, if you like feel like your mind wanders and you're like, I like what I'm thinking about, I'm going to keep thinking about it. Great, do that. I think it would be cool right now to do one of my favorite meditations to understand this concept of diving into your body to see what sensations are like and understanding. So I know that they gave you a card earlier to ask me questions, but you're going to use that right now for something else. Just write down. And if you don't have a card, it's okay. You can just mental note. And if you're at home on Zoom, for those of you on Zoom, just think of a number. So you're going to, in your mind, I want you to think of how you feel right now. Just anything, 1 through 5. 1 is I feel great. 5 is I feel kind of crappy. Okay, so just think about and write it down however you feel. No judgments. You could scratch this out later or erase it. I won't look, I promise. Okay. And now I want you to, if you can, put stuff down, and I want you to sit up. We're going to do just a little meditation real quick. So when you do this, first thing I want you to do is just kind of orient yourself. So take a look around and just notice where the doors are, notice where the windows are, the back room, just to kind of go, okay, this is where sound's going to be coming from. I might hear something to my right. Well, it's Joe, or the door might open. Just that's orientation, the day, the time, and then just sit up really tall. But if that hurts your back, don't. Sit back in the chair. That's okay. But if it feels good, sit up tall, and let's just take a breath. So inhale and exhale. Maybe you already feel a little calm, maybe not, no judgment. If you like closing your eyes, just allow them to rest gently. If you want to look forward, just look forward at something. You don't have to close your eyes. You can pick a spot and look at it. And I'm going to walk you through this. It's going to be short, but I'll walk you through a couple things. So I want you to bring to mind the sensation of being hungry. So just think about being hungry and see if you can identify what your body is telling you to know that you're hungry. So how do you know you're hungry? Maybe your stomach feels empty. Maybe you imagine food. How do you know you're hungry? Okay, take a breath. Inhale and exhale. Now think about being tired. So imagine you're tired, and maybe you are, so it's not that far to jump. And how do you know that you're tired? What is your body telling you? Are your eyes heavy? Do you picture your bed or your pillow? How do you know you're tired? All right, take a breath. So inhale and exhale. And now think about something that makes you happy. Maybe a vacation, or a person, or a particular meal, just something that brings you joy. And then be curious, how do you know you're happy? Are the corners of your eyes lifted up? Do you feel light? Are you smiling? How do you know you're happy? All right, take a breath, inhale and exhale. And now recall something that's a little irritating. Nothing too big, but just something that bothers you. Maybe it's a little frustrating, an argument you had with someone, or a paper that's due that you haven't finished. Something that's a little frustrating. How do you know you're frustrated? How do you know you feel a little anger or anxiety? Where do you feel that in your body? Heavy chest, maybe your hands are clenched. And take a breath, inhale, exhale. And now recall again something that brings you joy. So whatever thought you had before that made you think thoughts of happiness or joy, see if you can recall that. and see if you can feel that in your body. Where do you feel that? How do you know you're happy? And take a breath, inhale. And as you exhale, soften your eyes, relax your cheeks, soften your jaw, your chest, your belly, your hands. And just bring your thoughts, your awareness to your feet on the ground. Just notice your heels, your toes. And when you're ready, allow your eyes to open and just refocus on the room. Let's take a look around for a minute. Might be helpful to stretch because it's late in the day and we all need to stretch. And just jot down or think about how you feel right now after that. And look at how you felt before and how you feel after. And then maybe even assess like what you thought about that. Did it suck? Did you like it? Right? Maybe 1, you loved it. 5, you hated it. A lot of these meditations aren't for everybody. Maybe that one was frustrating. Maybe it was beautiful. Did anyone like that one? Yeah, cool. Did anyone hate it? Oh, that person on Zoom hated it. I got a text message. No. So this is a really great meditation to do to tune into what our body is doing. Because a lot of times our body has information that it has, but we're not listening to. But it informs us before something happens. For instance, your hands are clenched. Your jaw is clenched. You're like, oh, why do I have a headache? At the end of the day, you're like so confused why your head hurts. And you're like, your shoulders are like up to your ears. You're like, why do my shoulders hurt? Right? Most likely something was happening to create stress, to create that bodily response. But if you know this ahead of time, oh, I feel my shoulders right now. Okay. And then you can even go, wow, I wonder what just happened. I wonder what just happened to make me have this response. And that's when you become curious. Yes. Aha. Curious. Because a lot of times we're triggered. We are triggered without realizing it. And I was just on a call the other day and someone was telling me that they don't even use the word triggering anymore because it's triggering. And I know it's funny, but it's true. So activated. So we decided maybe we should use the word activated. So how do you know when you're activated? I was working with a police officer who I had done this training with, and then I went in and did a follow-up with 4 weeks of training with her. And she was telling me that, and this was before COVID, so this is where it gets weird. She was telling me that she doesn't go to the grocery store anymore. And you say that now and people are like, so what? Amazon, right? Like every Instacart, we're all doing that now. It was before COVID. So it was before all these delivery groceries were happening. And I was like, why? What's going on? And so we kind of worked through it. And she told me that every time she goes into a grocery store, because I said, let's go to a grocery store and just see what happens. So every time she goes into a grocery store, she feels anxiety. Like all of a sudden she feels anxious, and she notices it because she starts getting this really heavy feeling in her chest. And so when we talked about it a little bit more, we realized that the last time she was in a grocery store, she was processing a homicide. And she connected the smell of a grocery store with the blood of the homicide. And she made that connection. And so now every time she smells a grocery store, she's triggered. And knowing that she had this heavy feeling in her chest is informative, right? That is such great information. My chest feels heavy. What's happening? Something's going on. I need to take a breath, right? So a lot of times we're triggered, but we don't know it. And by doing something like a signaling meditation, like we did earlier, where you pay attention to your signals, helps develop a system where you go, okay, when my hands are clenched, I know something's going on. When my stomach is upset, how often do we have a gut feeling, right? There is a gut-brain connection, right? We have neurons that synapse in our gut. The gut is a real thing. It's our baby brain. Because what we try and do is go, okay, what is mindfulness? We get triggered. What do we do now? Well, we go, okay, it's a tool. Mindfulness is not a one-stop shop. It's not a perfect pill. Mindfulness is something you can take and implement in the time. We talk about with this training before, during, and after. You have situations where you're pulling up to a scene and you can start dysregulating before you even get there because you know you're going to a heavy, heavy scene. So doing things like feeling your hands on the steering wheel before you get there, taking 5 breaths before you get there. So that's pre. Then you have during, right? So in the moment, what do you do? Okay, feet on the ground. How do I feel? Every chaos is all around me. I'm going to put my feet on the ground, right? I'm going to do some square breathing right now. Or after, when all the chaos has ended, how do you process that? How do you take this home with you? Do a body scan. And by going over all these, you start realizing I can plug these into different scenarios, different times, different things work. And you start analyzing over and over again, because I'll tell you, I keep saying this, but not everything works for every situation. When I work with fire services, and this is what I've learned in every year, when I work with fire services, I used to take out my chimes and ring my bells, right? And I constantly have my eyes open. So I'm scanning all the time for dysregulation. I ring these chimes and I would see this every time, 3 chimes, 4 chimes. And so then I would redirect and I'd say, oh, let's focus on our breathing, or let's focus on some sounds. And finally, I don't know why I didn't ask, but finally one day someone was like, I can't listen to chimes. And I was like, oh God, I've been seeing this for years, but now tell me about it. I'm slow sometimes. So I said, tell me about it. What is happening? And they were explaining to me that, you're in the firehouse and you get a 3-alarm bell, there's a problem. So every time I'm ringing my little chimes that I'm like, oh, this is so relaxing. They're like, fire, right? You ring them 4 times, it's an even bigger issue. 5 times, it's like off the charts. Engines are coming from all over the city, right? So to tell someone, I want you to sit and listen to these chimes and do a meditation doesn't always work. You have to be cognizant of the population that you're working with and be curious and ask, like I didn't. Correctional law enforcement, right? So correctional, these are people who work in the jails, in the prisons. You know what they're doing all the time? Listening for sounds. Listening to make sure someone's not walking where there shouldn't be walking. Make sure that door didn't open, like that door that you want shut. Make sure it's still shut. So when I sit and say, let's do a listening meditation, we're going to listen to the sounds in the room. It's triggering. You don't want to sit and listen to sounds when that's what you're dealing with all the time, is listening to sounds that are overstimulating. The second you start focusing on sounds, overstimulation. With law enforcement, can you see these people wearing body armor? You sit and I've made all these mistakes, which is why I know all this. I'm like, okay, that didn't work. Take a deep breath. How constricting is that? You're trying to breathe in a bulletproof vest? You can't do that. That's claustrophobic, right? So telling someone we're going to do a deep breathing exercise, wrong move. Some people might like it, but most likely if you're wearing a very tight vest, focusing on your breath is not the right move at that time. And you learn this by analyzing over and over again what works for you. Because maybe deep breathing doesn't work for the officer who's wearing a bulletproof vest, but guess what? Maybe they're not wearing a vest another day. And then they're like, ooh, now I like this meditation. This one works now. So you pivot and you do that one. And again, it's all about assessing. Stop, assess. And I go over and over again with this. And when I'm giving these, I took my watch off because Siri yelled at me and I just want to make sure. When we're giving these, when I do a training, I like to provide a bunch of tools, because a lot of times people think, it's another misconception of mindfulness, that I should be able to sit there and do a meditation all on my own. I should just be able to do a meditation. And you know what? Sometimes we need guides. We need guides to tell us how to meditate, to talk us through it, to walk us through it. So why not use something that we all have, our phones? There are a ton of apps, right? A ton of apps that you can pull from that are really good. And that one, that DTX at the top, that one has biofeedback. So you actually, before a meditation, like our analysis that we just did with how I feel before and how I feel after, you go on and you look at it before your meditation and it reads your eyes and the blood pressure. And then you do it again after, and it tells you like if you calm down. So you get real time. And I have a partnership with them where I can, any first responder that takes my training, they can get the app for free for like 3 months. So here's like a great thing. You don't need to rely on yourself. You can use the tools that are out there. I have all these, there they are, meditations on my Instagram. And these, I give this little barcode every time. If you want to click on it, you can click on it and you could get these guided meditations to help you walk through it. It takes you to my YouTube channel, but also I work side by side with a lot of peer support groups. So in the beginning, I mentioned, what's out there, what's currently available to first responders. Well, they have peer support, and that's a group that's trained for trauma, and they're on the inside. And so if they see that there was a critical incident, they come to you and say, John, I saw you were in this critical incident. Can we talk about it? Right? There's also therapists on staff that they can go to and talk to. But both these are very hard because it is saying that, okay, I have a problem. I have a problem. And the barrier right there is huge, because the second you say you have a problem, you might be pulled from duty. And so to have someone on the inside that you're relying on is hard. It's not wrong. It works really well for some people, but for some people, it's hard. So I give them a first line to me. And I say, anybody who I do my training, they have a first line to message me directly. But also I have tools that I partnered with the Department of Justice Services to create for it was the International Chiefs Police Association, a toolkit. And you guys could take a picture of this right now and go directly onto this toolkit. And this is for anyone who wants to, all these first responders, they could get all these guided meditations, all these instructions, and it's all free. Right? This isn't something that has to be paid for. And this was through the government. This was, a paid program that they did through the DOJ. And it has all these different meditations, all these different tips. I see someone's taking a picture, so I'm going to wait. Do I need to go back? Okay. Well, you are. No. Sorry. Okay. And then also, I have these leave behinds where, I talked about stop, drop, and roll, but sometimes it's this big theory, and then you could break it down. And I hand these out and take this home with you. Look, here's what you do. Here are all, you stop, you can go through the top, and then you drop. Look at all these different meditations. You could practice these on your own and see which ones are available to you at different times of the day. And then here's how you do it at the end. Right? And I'm not a graphic designer. So if anyone has ideas on how to do this, tell me, because that's what I did. And I don't like it. And then we talk about creating a program, like your own program, and demystify this idea that it has to be a 20-minute meditation. It doesn't. It can be 12 minutes. It can be 5 minutes. It could be 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon, 5 minutes at night, or just once. But try it for 2 weeks. Take 2 weeks and see if it'll work for you. And I've gone back many times. I do these evaluations at the end of each training, but then I go back into these departments and these agencies and ask them about it. Is this working for you? I was working with a woman in law enforcement, and shift work is really hard for first responders, right? You're working 24 hours a day. Sometimes you're working nights, and then you're working days. And it disrupts your sleep patterns. So sleep is a very, very difficult thing. So I worked with her she did this training, and then I did another 4 weeks with her. And she takes sleeping medication, which was great and really useful for her. But after doing 4 weeks of creating a program like this, she came back to me and she said she was able to stop taking her sleeping medication. Every night she would do the body scan. And this is now 5 years later, and I just checked on her before I came here to make sure it was still true. And she's still doing it, and it's still working for her, right? So does it work? Yeah. I was just after taking this one course. This is a 4-hour course, by the way, because I realized early on that I needed to get people to come. And, I changed the name, and that brought some people. It was no longer mindfulness, now it's tactical. So they came, and then I was like, okay, now I'll offer food. So they came to eat food. And then I figured out, oh, I need to get this certified somehow. If they could get their in-service hours for taking this training, we could bring people in. And so it's a 4-hour, all that to say, it's 4 hours, because that's how a lot of the police agencies, they have these 4-hour windows that you need to use for certification. So I send my curriculum through the academies, and they're able to get certified. Anyway, after taking a 4-hour course, this correctional officer I was working with, he was, and he told me this like a week after he took the course. So they're in this jail, and it's a federal probation. So like at the top of the jail is all of the really, really bad guys. And he had been trained to work on this top floor, but he had never done it yet. So this was his first day working top floor, and he was so nervous. He told me, he was like, I was so nervous. I was like almost shaking. So he goes in, and they asked him, I just need you to transport this prisoner from one cell to another. They just needed to change his cell. So he's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And he goes and he opens up the door, and the guy puts his hands out, cuffs him, and he does all procedure, right? The whole thing. He's got the guy in front of him. He says he's walking behind him, and he's walking. And then all of a sudden, like, he doesn't even know how it happened. He said he had the guy in a chokehold up against the back wall, holding him. And the officer became conscious again when he's looking at this guy, holding him, and this guy's face is turning blue. And he said, he goes, wow, I'm out of my window of tolerance. And he had a moment where he was like, this is that moment. Yeah. Oh my God. And he released him, and he put him down. And when we went through what happened, what happened was the guy was walking, and he was so nervous about what was about to happen. The prisoner just tripped, like literally just tripped. And he was like, this is it, it's happening, he's gonna kill me. And like, without even thinking, just picked the guy up and just put him against the wall, right? Just like that, he's just flipped. But then he remembered, oh, what am I supposed to do? I need to take a breath. And he said he just took a breath, put him down, and continued transporting him, right? And that was just after the 4-hour training. He hadn't even like had a chance to meditate yet. He was like, just from remembering window of tolerance, right? Another guy I was working with, so I work with LA County Fire Department a lot, and LA County Fire Department owns the lifeguards, which is kind of cool. And so I was working with all these lifeguards, and after training and after some work, this one guy was telling me that he, when he was younger, it was about 15 years ago, he was working a particular guard station where it was all the locals. So all the locals would come out and surf there. So he never really had to, it wasn't like all the people who didn't know how to swim were coming in and swimming. It was all locals, and they were all surfers. So he's got his eyes on, but he's kind of casual about the whole thing. And this one kid was there who is always surfing. And so he has eyes on him, and he's surfing, and so the lifeguard's looking over here, and he's looking over there, and he looks back, and he sees this guy take a wave, and he catches the top of the wave, and then something happens, and he flips and falls off, right? And he's thinking, okay, he just fell off the backside of the wave, no big deal. He continues looking and sees the guy like in the water, kind of doing a very strange bob. And he knew this kid and knew this kid was a great surfer, but then all of a sudden was like, this doesn't look right. And he goes out, he takes the floaty thing, and goes out into the water. And when he gets to the guy, he's just about to go under. And right before he goes under, he's able to like get him under and he starts pulling him. Well, now the water's rough and he's having a hard time getting him back. So he's pulling him back, and he finally gets him onto the beach. And as he gets him onto the beach, he just kind of drags him on in a kind of aggressive way. Well, turns out this guy ended up having a broken neck and was completely, became paraplegic. And 15 years later, this lifeguard is still living with this thought of, did I do that? Did I bring him in incorrectly? Was I responsible? Did I not hold his neck? There's a procedure, how you hold the neck to bring someone in. Did I not do that? Right? And when I talked about the concept of the second arrow, of this idea that a lot of mindfulness has this judgment component, right? Doing things non-judgmentally. And the idea that suffering, is the first arrow, and we get the first arrow, and that's the initial incident, and that's the suffering. But the second arrow, that one's optional, right? And that's the one that we put onto ourselves. And just hearing that for him was like an opening for him to go, wow, right? I can let go of this now, and I can be okay with this. This is the second arrow, and I need to release the second arrow. So does it work? Yeah, right? Even after just these simple little trainings that I'm doing, I'm just planting seeds. I'm not even like doing these long seminars. It's just I'm planting seeds and it's working. When I was driving down the street in my big truck with my dog, and I looked over, so I had this moment where the 911 operator was like, "You need to get out of the car." I was like, okay, fine. So I got out of the car and I went over to this woman, and I put the 911 operator on speakerphone, and I'm like, okay, what do I do? And she's like, you need to check if she's breathing. You need to feel if she has a heartbeat. And so I'm trying to she's sitting up, these two guys are holding her, and I couldn't feel anything. It was like the position was wrong, everything was wrong. So I picked her up, and this woman was like 3 times my size, and I drag her onto the ground, and she's lying there on the ground, and the 911 operator is like, you need to check if her heart's beating. You need to, I'm like, okay. People are now crowding around us, okay? Cars are now lined up along the street. My dog's barking. Literally, I hear my dog barking. And I am just like so overwhelmed. I mean, I hit my limit like you have not believed. I just was at my max. And the 911 operator, she did such a good job, but she kept going, give her CPR, check for her breath. You need to. And I'm like, ah. So I had this moment of like, oh my God, I'm about to freak out. And it just hit me. I was like, oh, this is it. This is that moment that I've been teaching for so long. And I put my phone down. I remember so clearly. I put my phone down on the ground. I was on my knees at the time. I put my phone down. I stood up. I spread my feet apart, and I just looked at the ground, and I just kind of felt my feet for a second. The 911 operator is literally yelling at me. And I just was like, I need to just stop. And I just felt the cortisol recede. I felt like everything. I literally felt synapses happening. I felt my brain come, my prefrontal cortex was like, think, do something. And I was like, I got this. And I got on the ground, and I mean, she was not doing anything, no heart, no breath, nothing. And I just started doing CPR. And I mean, I remember that song. It's like, staying alive. And I did it, and I was like, stay. And I'm only joking because she survived. I wouldn't be joking if she died, but she popped back on, and her heart, it was like, and I was like, oh my God, that just happened. And so what, does it work? Yeah. I had this moment where I remembered, I remembered to pause. I remembered to take a breath. I remembered to just kind of dive deep, dig, 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 and go. And in fact, I think, well, you could probably define it better than I could, but the word mindfulness, one of the translations is that which we remember. And what are we remembering? We're remembering to breathe, to pause, to reflect, to feel. And that's what I did. I remembered, and I thought, wow, you know, it's working for the population I'm working with, and it's working for me. And huge shout out to Leslie University, because this is truly where the seed was planted for me. I was teaching mindfulness before I came here, but it wasn't until I wrote my thesis that I realized my true passion, which was working with first responders. And it's right here. So thank you. Thank you for opening up my eyes to what I truly, truly love doing, which is teaching, not mindfulness, but tactical brain training. Okay, it's mindfulness. And thank you guys so much for being here with me tonight. I know that we said there would be some questions. If you guys have questions, and maybe you scribbled your numbers on your notes so you could scratch that off, but I think Yasmin is going to do some questions if we have any.
That was wonderful. And right after eating dinner, it was very interesting for me to connect with what hunger feels like.
Oh, yeah.
It took me a while, so that was great. Big shout out for Leslie and for Jonathan and everyone to organize this, and what a lovely guest to have with us. So Gina and I actually go back in our mindfulness studies as well. And I have so many things that were coming up in terms of questions as we're collecting some questions. So while those are arriving, I'm thinking of a couple of things. So obviously this is very powerful and helpful, which is very interesting that even in the moment of when they're responding, that they can become aware, which they're not aware before, yeah. And so to me, it seems so obvious they should get trained in it.
Yes.
How easy is it, and what type of barriers do you actually deal with to go in and actually to start the training?
So blood, sweat, and tears. It's really hard. There is a huge barrier. Mental wellness in general, has stigma. And I mentioned earlier that anytime you say anything about maybe feeling depressed or sad, all of a sudden you might be pulled from active duty. And so I had to find all these tricks, and it's marketing. I had to find all these tricks of like changing the name, right? Of creating a certification for it so that there's reasons to be there, right? Also working directly with peer support, going in there. So I'll do, and also, in the beginning, I wasn't getting any traction. And when I started making these changes, one of the changes I made was to build a non-for-profit. So I became a nonprofit because what I was doing initially was I was working with a lot of organizations doing mindfulness, not this population, just random populations doing mindfulness. And I was making money doing that. And what I was doing was I was working pro bono for a while with first responders to get my foot in the door because no one wanted to pay for it. No one. And so I would just offer myself up for free. I'm like, I'm coming in, let's do something, right? And I gave free, I still do. I work pro bono all the time, but a lot of pro bono work. What I realized was what I could do is start a nonprofit and start getting grants. Because the scales were tipping. I was doing more first responders than I was regular population, but I wasn't supplementing it with the income. I'm like, I'm going to go broke fast. So I created a nonprofit to get grant money so that I could still be free, but now I was being paid for it through grants. So that was one of the key ways of fixing some of that and feeding them.
And so this question kind of relates to that, which you're already answering, but A lot of the people I know in the field of first responders scoff at the idea of mental health. How do you approach that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's all of them, everyone. So there's two different things that happen. If my training is mandatory, if the agency is telling people they need to be there mandatory, I have like a 50% success rate. 50% of the people are like, screw you. 50% are like, ooh, we love this. If it's not mandatory and they're coming on their own, it's a self-selecting group. So, you know, you look at the numbers and go, it's self-selecting, they're there. But still, it's the rate is really high for success as far as feedback's concerned. But I just go in and break down the stigma, right? And say, this is, you know, one of the mistakes I made early on was to imply that people were broken. And I didn't mean to. It's just how it was coming out. I'm like, you're suffering, right? And finally, this guy pulled me aside and he's like, Gina, we're not broken. And I was like, oh, you're right. You're not broken. And so I started just putting that in my conversation. I'm not here to fix you, right? I'm supporting, I'm giving tools. I'm giving tools to help decrease suffering. You're not broken. I'm not going to fix you. But here, try this. Maybe you like it. So that's one of the ways.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Completely unrelated, but especially these days, this also rings true question for me too. Have you worked with volunteer first responders?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother group of people too. Again, like when you're volunteering for something, I used to do volunteer work for this one company and I felt like $1 million. Everybody loved me. They're like, oh, she's volunteering. She's so great. So you just have a different attitude, I think, when you're volunteering for something. So it brings a different type of person in who's volunteering. And volunteering, I don't know. I feel like they're a little bit more chill. I don't know how to explain it. It's funny. That makes me think of, I have done trainings before. I typically like to do just law enforcement or just first responder, you know, or just fire service or just correctional. I've done a training before where I go in and it's a big group of people. I did one in Pasadena once and it was like calling all first responders. I literally walked in the room and I was like, oh my God, it's all cops and all firefighters. They didn't even know. And they just like gathered on their sides of the room. I'm like, they all have mustaches and looked really ripped and they don't. Okay. But there's something, right? It's like a self-fulfilling group. So volunteers, I find to be a little bit more casual in their approach and a little bit more open to this, but that's such a general statement. I don't know. That's just my experience. It might not be true for others.
And maybe more receptive.
Yeah,
easier.
that's the word.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Forgive me. I'm not sure if I'll be able to read some of the words. How would you relate your training to help someone dealing with grief and then the change? Having a hard time with meditation since their brain may not shut off. Yeah. And their stress is interfering with happiness and clarity.
Yeah.
What would you suggest after the stop, drop, roll?
Okay. This is, first of all, there's 300 things there. So yes. And I'm sorry. That's hard. My lane was never grief. But unfortunately, during COVID, I started working with a lot of people who were dealing with grief. And it's a really, really challenging thing. And I think that what I would say is go slow and find a meditation that works, not one that you're trying to shove into a box. And if something's not working, just don't do it. There are so many other options. And there are a ton of books on grief. And there are a ton of books on grief and mindfulness. And I would say, read some of those. And I would also say, go to my Instagram and message me. And I could talk to you more about it personally, one-on-one, and help, work, support, not fix.
I have another question. I don't know if we have time, and I don't know if you have any more coming in. Um, So in terms of, I'm thinking of the stages of when becoming self-aware is helpful. It could be in the midst of response and doing it in a skillful way, perhaps also recognizing, oh, I'm outside of my window of tolerance. And the other one is outside of the alert response, but really the rest of the life in terms of how that affects, and you kind of talked about it, sleep and quality of life changing. So there's something in between, which is kind of almost turning into more of their normalcy, whether it's their body. So from this elevated state, how would mindfulness, if you've noticed, help them to return back to a baseline, whether it's quicker, whether it's healthier? Are you noticing anything there?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to something I touched on earlier, which was chronic, the word chronic, right? And a lot of times, first responders, right, you're taught to run towards the emergency, right? You're taught to go and help these emergent situations. So your framework, your narrative all the time is about emergency. And when you're living in that constant state of emergency, I mean, I didn't get a chance to talk about cortisol levels, but cortisol levels just become so high with stress, right? The stress response system, how it works, it just permeates these cortisol into your system. And that's not to say, and I just want to point out, like, not all stress is bad, right? We need some stress sometimes. We need stress to be able to run towards the emergency. You need to be able to just take off. You need that blood in your legs to just take off. But what it is it's realizing and noticing when it's above and beyond. When things are, I told a story tonight over dinner about how I got involved in mindfulness, and it involved me losing my cool on my then 4-year-old daughter. And I thought that snow outside and a kid, I'm from California, it doesn't snow in California. It was snowing and my 4-year-old wouldn't put her jacket on. And I thought that was an emergency, right? That's not an emergency. But I was living in a constant state of emergency because that's how I was reared, right? And so finding ways to notice that and doing things like that signaling meditation that we did, I know that when I'm stressed out now, my chest feels heavy. I actually feel a heaviness in my chest. I feel my face like it just fills with heat. But I know that because I've been practicing that meditation and going deeper with it, right? We just did, oh, what bothers you? Like, give me something that creates a love, but try doing it with something deeper in a safe space. You start going, wow, your hands, they clench, your jaw, your shoulders, right? And so starting to dive into your body and go, okay, what am I feeling in my body will inform what's going on in the environment. So I would say, learn to have these feelings in your body, to start identifying things to help you. I was walking down the street and my father had passed away, and it was like, this was years ago. And he had passed away 2 years previous to this. And I was walking down the street. Everything was great. Everything was lovely. And I'm walking. And then I now go down to the other side of the street and I'm pissed. I'm all of a sudden in a bad mood. I was just like, I hate the world. I hate everything. Just like that. I was in a bad mood. No one's ever in a bad mood for no reason, right? And then I had to go back down where I came from. So I'm turning this way and I go back again. And someone walks by who looked just like my father. And I wasn't mad because I saw him. I was sad because, like, oh my God, there was I see my father. And what had happened was he was on the other side of the street when I was on the other side of the street going that way, but I didn't process. My brain tagged it as, oh, that guy looks like your father. You're going to get really sad. My body got really sad. I was all of a sudden in a bad mood, right? But I wasn't cognizant of it. When I realized that, I was able to backtrack and go, oh, this is what just happened. But when we learn to go, why am I all of a sudden in a bad mood? That's information. Something has occurred in the environment that put you in that state. So paying attention to that is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Gina. So we do have a few questions online. So what we're going to do, hello, everyone, and thank you for your questions. We're going to take those questions and we're going to make sure that Gina answers them
Oh, really?
and send them
God,
to
that's a
everyone.
pressure.
Yes, we signed you up for extra work, but I think that'll help. It'll be a little hard to.
What are we just standing here waiting?
Yeah, so, no. I have a couple of questions, but
Okay.
actually, one of them, I have a feeling since you mentioned about introductions being hard, so maybe you won't say too much about yourself. So my curiosity is what's coming down the pipe and what are you doing
Okay.
next? But there's something exciting I can share in case Gina doesn't want to share herself. You're writing a book for PESI.
Yes.
And tactical brain training. So I'm not sure when the book is going to be out.
Me neither. I have committed to giving them PESI. I don't know if anybody's familiar with PESI, but they do a lot of work with doctors and with first responders and with psychologists and psychiatrists. And it's a very, so they're publishing my book. And the book's going to be called Tactical Brain Training. Shocking, right? And June, I've committed to give them my work by June. So who knows when?
So Gina is very, very busy while she's training us, while she's training everyone. That's what she's also doing. So be on the lookout, and we'll probably also make an announcement. I can't wait. It's really exciting.
It'll be exciting.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to share in terms of what else is coming down?
So I received funding recently to create a Train the Trainer, which is really, really hard for me. And I get embarrassed a lot, but this one's really hard for me. You know, I am like, who am I to create a Train the Trainer? So I'm doing it reluctantly because I feel like it would be really good because a lot of people in these departments, I feel like they could take it internally. And my goal is to create a Train the Trainer for individuals inside the departments so that they could do this themselves and take me out of the equation. I don't need to be there. So I am working on that, and that's taking a little bit of time because you have to write all the curriculum and it takes a little bit of time, but that's my next step that I'm working on also. Thank you.
It's so exciting because now
I am sweating right now, you guys, stop. That is
because a lot more people will have access to it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how you're going to train them on your hairstyle.
Yeah. She's my first client right there. She's doing it.
So I'm not sure if there are any other questions, but is there any other question you would like to be asked yourself?
Oh
at
my
this
gosh.
time?
No, it's absolutely not.
Yeah.
I will tell you though, like, what time is it? Do we have time for one more thing?
If you look at the top.
Um,
Fine. Yeah, we have a.
But I think, I don't know how to get to it now. Because there was one thing I wanted to share that I just thought was interesting. So you guys can see this, right? Okay. So can Zoom see this?
No, I stopped sharing, so if you want to start sharing again.
What if I don't want to? Cool. I'm just going to move this. Okay, so I do these surveys at the end of each of my, hello, let's just use that. I do these surveys at the end of each of my trainings, and most of them are informative. Some of them have scathing reviews. I'm like, oh my God. And those are the ones I pay attention to, right? Like, I hate her hair and things like that. But some of them's really good. And I just think this is interesting. And this is not like a pat on my back. I'm not saying that, but it's just, look at this. Like, after completing tactical brain training, I feel better able to identify and de-escalate triggers. Okay, 50% strongly agree, right? Well, yeah, 42%, 50% agree, right? How about this one? I've increased my stress reduction, whatever, that one's boring. I feel better able to regulate. Huge. Look at that. Better able to regulate stress. Strongly agree and agree. This is just one survey that predominantly this is what I get afterwards. I get, are these, you don't want to read all the comments because some of them are embarrassing, but I get like the length of the training more often than not in my comments. The biggest comment is, I wish this was longer. I'm like, I was barely able to bring 4 hours into here. I mean, like how about this one? The interventions were useful and informative. Look at that. 71% strongly agree. 28% just randomly agree. Like that, these are big numbers. Can these be applied at work? Look at that. 85% strongly agree that they could be applied at life and work. This was just one with 14 responses, but every one I do has these results. I am shocked every single time I read this. I'm shocked every single time. So anyway, I just want to share that. Does it work? I think so. Okay, I can stop sharing now. What else? And we have no more questions, right? Okay, let me figure out how to unshare this. I can't. They're just going to keep looking at it. Hold on. I'm just making a mess of things over here. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, yes, thank you. The powers that be. Okay. Let me show, oh no. Here, I want to just put up my contact information. I am, and we'll share this with all the Zoom people too, but I am available. And I truly mean that. I'm available. I can answer questions. I can give you guidance where you can look for other things. I'm not the only person. I'm barely here. There are so many other people who can help, who can support. So take my information down and know that you can reach out at any time. And also on my website, I have agencies can register and sign up for trainings through my website. They can request information. So if you have anybody that is interested in the training, you can direct them to my website. And thank you guys so much for staying so late.